Pardon me while I have a strange interlude.
There is nothing else. Life is an obscure hobo bumming a ride on the omnibus of art.
In the misty corridors of time, and in those corridors I see figures, strange figures.
Welcome back, my friends, to the AP Strange Show. Today's show is brought to you by Lewis Tully and Associates Paranormal Insurance Agency. When you hear about paranormal activity and hauntings and ghosts, there's a lot of things that people talk about. Part of it is just being afraid to come out and tell people because they're going to think you're crazy. And a lot of people will focus on the fear element, how scary hauntings are. But rarely do people talk about the damage incurred by spectral apparitions, ghosts, and other such pan-dimensional entities. Lewis Tully understands where you're coming from, and he has contracts for you that will cover everything from your average poltergeist to a focused, non-terminal, repeating phantasm or a class 5 full roaming vapor. He covers it all. So if you if you are in need of a little bit of insurance coverage for damages caused by spectral apparitions, RSPK, poltergeists, even demons or interdimensional entities, call Lewis Tully and he'll have your back. So today's episode is a third times a charm episode, and this one is it gets a little tricky because we're talking about the Ghostbusters franchise. And the third movie, technically, chronologically speaking, came out in 2016, was the reboot. But we're skipping over the reboot because we're going with the the canon of the sequel universe of Ghostbusters. And I think it's important to mention right here that this is not against the reboot. Like, this doesn't. There's no comment on the reboot here, but for our purposes, we're considering this the third. And if anybody listening wants to do an episode about the reboot as the third movie, I am absolutely open to that. Send me a message and we can talk about it. But for today, we're talking about Ghostbusters Afterlife. And my guest is a man of mystery, a seeker after strangeness, pulling the synchromystic strings and having a good time doing it. Known for his grandiose introductions like this for his co-host Stephen James Buckley on their podcast Vayse, the one, the only, Mr. Peter C. Hine.
Hello.
Welcome, Peter.
Well, thanks for having me. It's really, really good to be here. I've told you before, but I'm a massive fan of your podcast and your writing. So it's just a real pleasure to be here talking to you now.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it's great to have you. I also enjoy your work. Your Vayse podcast is a lot of fun. It's a lot of really good, insightful conversations with magical practitioners and people of all kinds of odd persuasions in the paranormal realms. You get into a lot of really good topics on there with some really good music from Mr. Buckley.
Yeah.
Design. So
he has a new album of the music for season 3 coming out soon as well, which should be good. I'm actually quite nervous today because this is the first time I think I've done a podcast without having the safety blanket of Stephen James Buckley there with me. So it's a weird experience. I feel kind of lonely here in England.
Hopefully my introduction will set you at ease a little bit.
It was very, very, very generous. But and I appreciate it. I think that the thing that we did with Vayse was to we made a feature of the fact that neither of us know anything about what we're talking about, and therefore we could just get people on and just be like, so tell us about this then, and just let them do that, and that sort of helped the form, I guess.
Well, I mean, I think that is a really cool feature of your show because you guys are both kind of learning and progressing at the same time with some of these subjects, and it's kind of cool to like be on the journey with you while you're doing it, you know? So
Oh, cheers. Oh, thank you. I did I was interested in what you were saying in the intro about the reboot as well. the Ghostbusters reboot, because Ghostbusters is one thing, the one topic that I actually know something about. And the Ghostbusters reboot, I was so excited before that came out because I'd loved Bridesmaids and I'd loved the work that it's Paul Feig, wasn't it, who did that?
Yep.
And then like I was kind of disappointed with it. I've got to be honest. And yeah, I don't want to dwell on that one, like as you say, because you may be able to cover that on another episode. But like, I think that like there was two reasons that I thought it might be difficult to discuss Ghostbusters Afterlife on your Three's a Charm, and one was the fact that it wasn't actually the third movie in the series; it was the fourth. But I think it was like the third canonical movie. But then
Right.
also, I think it was 37 years since the original Ghostbusters. I think 32 years since Ghostbusters
Well,
2 came out.
right. It's the events take place 32 years after the events of Ghostbusters 2, from what I
Yeah.
understand. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a long time, but we seem to be in like a bit of a phase of that kind of movie coming out again, don't we? Because this year
TV
alone,
as well.
yeah. I mean, you've got Beverly Hills Cop's just been rebooted onto TV, hasn't it? And then
So,
you've got this year coming out. I think Beetlejuice came out, the second Beetlejuice, um, Gladiator 2, Twisters, all just this year. These are ones that have
right.
got like 20 odd years since this. I don't know what it is that makes people suddenly think like, oh, well, we've got this IP lying around. We might as well try it again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the more cynical would say it's just playing on people's nostalgia and hoping that you can recoup money from that.
Yeah.
Um, in preparation for this show, I read some very, very barbed language directed at Afterlife, just talking about how it's just plain fan service. I think the
Yeah.
line from one of the critics was, "It's a movie designed for people who worship everything, but hold nothing sacred." Like, I'm like,
That's me.
ouch.
What did you think of it? I've been really interested to know what you like. Like, I know that's kind of what this podcast is about,
Well,
but like, did you enjoy it?
okay, well, just to put a final pin on the reboot, so we can set that aside.
Yeah.
The main reason I wanted to make a disclaimer about that specifically was because there was a lot of talk at the time that people were basically, well, I'll say it, shitheads were saying that were very disparaging towards it because of the all-female cast and
Yeah.
talking
Yeah.
about, oh, but you're gonna do a woke Ghostbusters. So I really just want to make sure people know that I'm firmly not in that camp. That's not
Yeah.
why we're glossing over it. It's just
No, I'm exactly the same. And I think that Jason Reitman, the director of Ghostbusters Afterlife, made an excellent point that Paul Feig doing that opened the door to be able to let the Ghostbusters Afterlife have Ghostbusters that weren't old men, basically,
right,
because you've got kids, you got women, you got there's female Ghostbusters, that it's I wonder if there hadn't have been that reboot, whether people would have started saying, oh, Ghostbusters Afterlife, you can't have a female Ghostbusters or whatever. No one even mentions it because they'd gone through all that with
right,
the reboot, which I think is like, and I've only seen the reboot once, so I don't want to be unfair to it. I just like, I'm such a fan of the original
mhm,
film, and to having like the original Ghostbusters make cameos in it, but not as their characters and that sort of thing. It felt weird to me, but I think there were a lot of good points to it as well. And obviously the cast was stellar, like absolutely incredible.
right,
And it made more money than any film since the original Ghostbusters. Like at the box office. It actually
okay,
did better than Ghostbusters 2. But the problem is that they had to, I think they'd spent as much in marketing. They did a huge marketing campaign. They spent as much on marketing as they had on the actual film itself. So they had to, in the end, make 300 million to recoup. And they couldn't do
okay,
it, whereas like Ghostbusters Afterlife had half the budget. Ghostbusters Afterlife was made on something like 75 million. And so when it made 200 million, it was a success. Whereas Ghostbusters, the reboot, made something like 230 million, which is really good. But it had to
right.
make 300 million to reboot it, to recoup what they needed.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mainly what I found distracting about the reboot was that a lot of it was filmed in Boston, a city I'm very familiar with, but was supposed to take place in New York City, which is a city I'm familiar with because I've been there. And if you've been to both places, you know they're very different looking cities.
Yeah.
And you're like, how is that gonna? And so I spent the whole time like, do I recognize this place? Like, is that part of Harvard University? Like, that looks familiar, you know? So it's distracting. It takes you out of the movie. So that's nothing against the movie. It's just me and where I live and being familiar with the two major
Yeah.
cities on the East Coast. But as far as Afterlife goes, we can jump over to Afterlife. So I only watched this movie very recently in anticipation for this show. So I think that probably says something about it for me.
Yeah.
But I suspect you and I are similar in that we grew up with the original movies. You already mentioned that, but yeah. So we grew up being huge fans of it. And do you think that encouraged your interest in the paranormal?
100%, like without a doubt. I mean, that is the reason that I'm here now. Yeah, this is the reason that Vayse is there. It's the reason I'm friends with Buckley, with Ghostbusters. You know, like it's the first film I remember watching. I think my grandfather had taped it on Christmas Day. There was only 4 channels like it, and you know, in England back in the 80s. I think we were of a similar age. I think, are we like I think did you grow up in the 80s as well? Yeah. And Christmas Day they premiered Ghostbusters. I obviously didn't know what it was. And then next time I went to my grandparents' house, he had it there on VHS. So like I watched that tape over and over and over again for about 10 years, you know, like always and I didn't realize it was the TV edited one with all like the swearing taken out, with that Ray's sexy ghost taken out, you know, like they had none of that in, but like, yeah, it was so formative for me. Like it made me, you know, after that I was obsessed, you know, and that obsession continued, just buying books about the supernatural, just trying to figure it out. You know, that is Ghostbusters is that. I think it was to so many people of our generation.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah. I mean, I had my own experiences as a very small child, so it's hard to say which came first. But I
Yeah.
do have a distinct memory of watching the first Ghostbusters film. And Peter Venkman is doing the ESP test with the Zener cards, which they do a callback to in Afterlife.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert. But
Yeah, I think we should say like, let's just spoil this movie. Like
we're gonna spoil the shit
yeah.
out of this movie. So. But I remember seeing the Zener cards, and I'm like, I know what those are. I've seen those in a book, and you know, because I had already been reading about J.B. Rhine and Louisa
Yeah.
Rhine at Duke University and the ESP experiments and stuff like that. Like as
Yeah.
a very small kid, so I assume my own experiences and looking into it was concurrent, at least, or prior to my infatuation with the Ghostbusters franchise. But
Yeah.
either way, we had the cartoon series here. Did you have that in the UK?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that's what I think that sort of fed into each other. I don't know. It's the first movie that I remember seeing, but I don't know whether I'd watched the cartoon before that because I remember loving the cartoon as well. I don't know which came first,
Yeah.
but yeah, I absolutely loved that cartoon.
Right. And I mean, it was mostly there to sell toys to children.
Yeah, exactly.
But
Yeah. And you discussed that on, I think, in your RoboCop episode about how, as the RoboCop films went on, they become more about merchandising toys to kids, you know, and that's definitely like the difference between Ghostbusters 1 and Ghostbusters 2, you know, just in those 5 years is that the cartoons being in between. And by that second movie, they have to be selling toys, you know, and they changed Slimer to make him look like cartoon Slimer. And they changed Janine to make her look more like Janine from the cartoon. And the whole thing just has a more sort of kiddie atmosphere to it. But there's bits in the first Ghostbusters movie that are actually like quite dark and quite scary.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't designed for kids, really. I mean, you mentioned the scene with the sexy ghost and Ray at the firehouse.
Yeah.
I remember seeing that with my young, innocent eyes and being like, what is actually happening here? I don't understand.
Yeah. I didn't see that scene until I was about 15, like until I realized that I'd spent my whole life watching. I think it was 1999, I think, when the first, I think it was at the 15-year anniversary, they released a DVD And I think
Yeah.
that was the first time that I saw the uncut version. And I was like, what? Like,
Yeah.
Ray, come on.
Well, I think I used to make my parents rent the VHS like all the time, to the point
Yeah.
where they were like, "Just rent. You need to rent a different movie. You rent this every time we go to the rental store." You know, like,
Yeah.
um, uh, but yeah, I have good memories of like summertime and my brother and I playing in our room, and my mom would put Ghostbusters on when the TV show came on, and she would turn up the volume all the way so we could hear the theme song because she knew we weren't paying attention at the time, and we'd come
Yeah.
running down the stairs to go watch it. You know?
Yeah, yeah, and it did have that. I mean, it was a proper sensation, wasn't it? You know, on in the same in the UK, I think the toys. I remember that one Christmas when all I asked for was Ghostbusters toys. You know, like I wanted the
Well, there
October.
was yeah, they had that one Christmas where they had the whole firehouse set and
Yeah,
everything, and yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah. And so you think that your love of the original movie? Do you like Ghostbusters too?
I love Ghostbusters too.
Yeah,
I never
yeah,
realized there was any kind of um, disdain for that movie. I always considered them pretty much equally good.
yeah.
You know,
Me
I mean,
too.
of course, the sequel is never going to be as good as the original most of the time, but I thought they were on a par with each other. I would watch either and have the same
Yeah.
same enthusiasm for it. You know,
I absolutely, because I remember that coming out of the cinema. My parents wouldn't take me to go and see it. Like neither of them were into Ghostbusters, and I think that they kind of knew that Ghostbusters, the original, scared me. So I had to get the first time I saw that, I went to my aunt's house. She took me to the video shop, and I rented Ghostbusters 2. You know, when my parents weren't there,
Mhm.
and watched it. And I just think I still think it's a great movie. You know, I didn't realize like you until I think probably until the days of Wikipedia, I didn't realize that people didn't like Ghostbusters 2, and that, well, that there was sort of like people thought it was an inferior sequel because it's just like for me, it's just a straight continuation of the story.
Right. And I mean, I'm wondering if that's just revisionist because I don't remember people complaining about it. I mean, I was a kid, but I don't remember. We didn't
Yeah.
have the same kind of fan culture around things
No.
back then. And I think
Yeah.
it's a bit of a revisionist history to like look at it and say that people were unhappy with it. I mean, maybe it didn't do as well as at the box office as they hoped, but
Yeah.
there was an article I found on cracks.com about how Gilbert Gottfried was supposed to be in a scene in that movie, and they actually
Really?
shot. Yeah, he was. I think it was actually it might have been an insurance company. Um, there was a scene where he was supposed to be the manager of an office that was haunted, and they shot it, but then they ended up cutting it from the final movie. And so
Ah.
the header of this article was like Gilbert Gottfried could have been in a Ghostbusters movie, you know, like
Yeah.
we're just learning this now because it was in some book about the franchise. And he spent half of this article about this one cut scene, like just dunking on the second movie and talking about how nobody liked it. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, how
Yeah.
old is the guy that wrote this? Is he like
Yeah.
25? Because I mean, we didn't we didn't have message boards and like but we weren't like geek culture was not a thing back then. Like geek culture
No.
meant you had a couple friends, like you had Buckley. You and Buckley
Yeah.
would sit there and talk geek out about Ghostbusters. That was as far as it went.
Exactly. That's it. Yeah. We'd go and try and catch ghosts because that's what we learned from Ghostbusters. Do you
Right.
think that like so you think that liking those first two movies stopped you from liking the third one? Or do you
I
think
Yeah, I think I was probably a bit cynical when it came out and
yeah.
wasn't in a hurry to rush out to the movie theater and spend the insane prices that movie theaters charge now to watch it with a bunch of overzealous fans that are going to like be cheering at every little Easter egg they dump into it.
Yeah.
Um, I wasn't in a hurry to see it, and then when it came on streaming, I was basically just gonna ride it out until it was free somewhere to watch on streaming.
Yeah, yeah,
But I
yeah.
ended up paying for it to watch for this. It's like $4. It's not a big deal, but
Yeah.
um, but I mean, yeah, I didn't have the same kind of excitement, and my brother was like shocked. He's just like, "What do you mean? What? It's Ghostbusters. You don't want to go see it?" I'm just like he went and saw it like 4 times, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't. I'd been waiting for like one of my childhood friends. He lives over in Finland now. I've been waiting for him to come back, so we could watch it together because he was coming back that Christmas that it was out. And he came, and we couldn't arrange a time to see it. So
Yeah,
I'd almost missed it at the cinema. Hadn't seen it. I'd been waiting, and I finally like got in just as they were about, probably like the last week it was running or something. But the person I went to see it with, they actually cried like at the end when Spengler comes back.
right.
They actually sort of like real tears, and I have to admit, the first time I watched it, I was pretty moved by it. I
Yeah,
mean, I'm under no illusion that I mean, it's not a good film, is it? It's not like a great movie. It's not going to go down in
yeah,
anyone's sort of list of great movies. But like I did find it like I found it a bit like just to be back in that world, like the actual canonical Ghostbusters world, I found quite moving. And I liked the idea of them making it about family instead of making it about business. As like the first one and the second one were I mean, well, I don't know, because I know that I did an episode of Vayse about Ghostbusters, and I argued that it was just a capitalist wet dream, basically. But
right.
one thing about Ghostbusters that I always felt, and I still feel now, is that it's a movie about friendship, and that's kind of comes through, the way that
Yeah,
yeah,
that's huge. And I think that's, not to go back to the reboot, but I feel like that's where the reboot kind of had a tenuous grasp on it, as they didn't focus so much on the friendship of the team. Um, they all just kind of got thrown in together,
yeah, yeah,
and where with the original Ghostbusters team, um, uh, you got the sense from like Aykroyd, Ramis, and Murray, they all knew each other in real life and worked together in real life, and they were on Saturday Night Live together. Well,
yeah,
I guess Harold Ramis wasn't, but they were already making movies at that point.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and those three guys were like friends in real life, and it kind of came through in the movie. Like you could feel
yeah,
that kind of warmth. And
yeah.
Winston, oh God, I'm forgetting his name already.
Winston Zeddemore, Ernie Hudson.
Ernie Hudson. Yeah, Ernie
Yeah,
Hudson is great in that movie. He's
yeah,
fantastic. And as soon as he
absolutely.
joins the team, he's just one of the team, and they're all pals,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
they're all in
yeah,
it together, like fighting back to back against bureaucracy or like whatever they run into,
yeah,
whether they're zapping ghosts or they're in the mayor's office defending themselves from yeah, attacks. Like
yeah, yeah. Definitely. And I think they were wise in Ghostbusters Afterlife to not try and recreate that. And doing it with family was like an easy shortcut to say, these people are very close. They're going to watch
yeah,
each other's back, which
yeah,
was which is interesting.
and I think as a corollary to that, it's actually kind of interesting to have the setting be Oklahoma, like out in the Midwest, small
Yeah,
town Midwest, because that's about as far as you can get from New York City. Like
yeah,
everything
yeah.
happens in 80s Manhattan, which I don't know how much you know about New York, but
So I've been to New York. I've been to New York
okay,
once, and it was basically my own Ghostbusters tour. I went to Fifth Avenue. I went to the library, New York Central Library. I went over to the Hook and Ladder, and you just did the sort of things that I'd
right,
always wanted to do. Because for me, like New York, because you're growing up in England, never went to America as a kid, and I only went to America for the first time in my 30s, and that was to New York. New York was almost like a character in that movie for me, just like
yeah,
the places, and like I was just, and when I went to New York, I was kind of skeptical about going, thinking like this is never going to live up to my expectations. But New York is a magical place, New York impressed me, even though it's things that I wouldn't normally like, like it's a
mhm,
lot of capitalism and consumerism and all this sort of thing. But there is that feel, when I walked into New York, I felt like I was in the Ghostbusters, like
yeah,
I
right.
absolutely loved it.
Well, it's
Um,
its own world in itself, and
yeah,
you mentioned it being like a character, and that's true of so many movies. Like, there's a lot of great movies from the '70s where old New York, or like the New York of the '70s,
yeah,
is so prominently featured that it's basically a character in the movie, and
yeah,
a lot of them in the '80s as well. And so I mean, as a kid, I felt like I always had this mythological New York in my head, and
yeah,
must have. I think it was really just cheaper to film there at the time, and
yeah. I mean, is that why they did the reboot in Boston?
yes, because it's currently cheaper to film in Boston.
Yeah, yeah.
We have a
And then,
lot of movies that are filmed in Boston, or where I live in Worcester, Massachusetts,
yeah,
or Salem, or the places throughout Massachusetts now are big places where movies get shot. and they'll try to
Yeah.
pretend it's just New York sometimes. So like they'll just dress up Boston and make it look like New York. Doesn't work. They're really different cities. But
Yeah.
about the New York of the '80s was a very different place to the New York of like more recently, like
Yeah, yeah.
contemporary New York.
So I've heard. Yeah.
Um, so it's kind of something that doesn't even exist anymore. But oh, you mentioned the New York Central Library. Do you know
Yeah.
the connection to real life weirdness with that?
No.
Oh, okay. Because I don't hear people mention this a lot, but the New York Central Library was pretty much where Charles Fort spent all of his time.
Oh, okay.
He would walk into there and find old science journals, and he would pour through them and find all like the little damned bits of facts and data
Yeah.
and write them out on little tiny cards. And then he would compile that into his writings for the Book of the Damned and Low and Wild
Amazing.
Talents. So the original Fortean stuff all came from Charles Fort being in that library,
Oh,
poring over
interesting.
science journals. And then
Yeah.
when he was done with his notes, he would take a box full of cards to Central Park, which is like across the street, and and he'd go sit on a bench and he would throw the cards out into the wind and let them blow away. Um,
Really?
yeah,
Amazing. I had no idea about that. I mean, I was like kind of like I couldn't believe it when I went to the New York Public Library that it's just sitting there on Fifth Avenue, because
right,
having they make it look really kind of grand on in Ghostbusters, when they're sitting with the lions and
hmm
everything. But actually it's just like on the street, like I kind of walked past it the first time. And I was like, what? It's just here in the middle of all these like shops and all these other
right,
other things, there's the library. So I filmed myself running up and down the steps a few times, like they do at when they see the library ghosts,
right.
just to go and get my money's worth from that holiday. But yeah, the bit in at the beginning of Afterlife when the guy who turns out to be Egon Spengler is driving the car, and like he sort of spins off the track and goes through that field of corn, and immediately it's kind of striking seeing Ecto One in a setting that isn't New York City, isn't it? It's got that weird
Right.
sort of, and the movie looks great. I mean, I know they didn't shoot it; they shot it in, I think, was it Alberta, I think, in Canada.
hmm
But it looks fantastic, like some of the shots, when they're going through the countryside, and particularly the one when they're catching the Muncher ghost and they've got the
Right.
gunner seat out and they've got the proton stream going up in the air with the radio controlled car, and they take like a long shot of Ecto One, and it looks really, really. I mean, I haven't watched a lot of Jason Reitman movies.
Yeah.
Like I don't know.
Well, he clearly learned from his father,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
Ivan
exactly. Yeah.
Reitman, who directed the original, well, the first one at least. I don't. Did he
The
direct
first
both?
two,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think that is one of the things that I think that he consulted his dad a lot on that movie, and
Right.
I've heard that his dad gave him a lot of tips and plus gave him access to all of the original footage because a lot of those sound effects are sampled from the first movie,
Oh.
and they even went so far as to get the original stem files for the soundtrack so they could take
Oh.
to pieces like Elmer Bernstein's soundtrack to it, which is, I mean, like I want to talk about the music in that movie because I think that's probably
Yeah.
my favorite bit of the whole film is how they rearranged Elmer Bernstein's score for that. Which is just absolutely, I really loved it. I mean, I still don't like it as much as the first Ghostbusters movie because there's something so idiosyncratic. And Elmer Bernstein was a professional. I mean, he worked 60, I think, 6 different decades doing film scores in Hollywood. He
Yeah.
wasn't just some guy that they'd got in. But like the soundtrack to the first movie is one of my favorite film soundtracks of all time. And when I'm driving around just in my car, I'll play that soundtrack because I love it so much. But I really, really liked what they did with it in the third one in Afterlife.
Yeah, I'm glad it was there because it gave you some continuity, and then they kind of padded it with popular music
Yeah,
outside of
yeah,
that as well, which, like, I'm not
mm,
always keen on that, but they had some decent choices. Like, they had some deep cuts in there. Like, they
yeah,
included "Can You Get to That" by Funkadelic. Like, oh, all
yeah.
right.
Yeah. I think that like I think that the music was probably the thing that made me feel nostalgic in that movie the most. I think just hearing some of the action go with that original score, I think that's kind of almost made the movie for me in a lot of ways. I read that Peter Bernstein, Elmer Bernstein's son, actually was like a consultant consultant on the score or something. And Peter Bernstein did the soundtrack to those. I think you mentioned them actually, maybe in your first episode, the Ewok movies.
Oh,
The two
okay.
made-for-TV Ewok movies. Was it like Caravan of Courage and The Battle for Endor or something?
Yeah,
Peter
yeah.
Bernstein scored those ones. So he is like, I mean, he's not quite going to the heights that his dad did, but he's like a professional, and he obviously knew what his dad wanted. He'd scored movies with his dad before as well, and so I think having him as consultant probably kind of lifted the whole thing, made it just feel a lot more authentic.
Wow, yeah. Because that is one of those things that's going to bypass all the other critical faculties of your mind and go straight to that memory hole. Is just like
Yeah.
the dun 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 dun, dun little jaunty piano thing. You're like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, there it is. Yep. Um,
Yeah.
and it's got a real Americana feel to it, which I think
Yes.
can tie either to New York City or the Midwest. It feels like a Gershwin kind of swing
Yeah.
to the
I mean,
music, which is great.
yeah, definitely. I had no issue with it not being set in New York. After I'd got over the initial sort of like, oh, it's not in New York, then I
Right.
did like the setting, and I loved the connection to Ivor Shandor, like the sort of the bad guy that doesn't appear basically in the first Ghostbusters movie. Um, Having the whole town there being built by him was like a really nice touch, and having the mine being the Selenium mine that they mined the girders to make Spook Central, the Shandor building from the first film, was
Right.
also a nice connection. And like, to be honest, like the cast, I really liked the actors as well. I thought it was a pretty like charming cast, with possible exception of, and like I don't like to single people out, but like I don't think Finn Wolfhard is evil, but like I could probably go the rest of my life without wanting to watch him on a screen again. Yeah, I
I
don't
made
hate
a
him.
yeah. I made a special note about him where I'm like, well, it seems like nowadays when you get you get entree into a fandom, uh,
Yeah,
like in a genre, like right, like he was
yeah,
in Stranger Things and then
yeah,
he was in It, so it's like, well, okay, now he's pigeonholed there, and like we got to use Finn Wolfhard, like
yeah.
and so I mean,
Like a
just
sort.
seeing him, even though he did a good job, I have no complaints with his acting. I thought he was good in it. Some of the plot holes in the movie for me, the parts that made it more difficult for me to suspend my disbelief revolved around him, like him
Yeah,
repairing Ecto One and getting it going.
yeah,
Like, okay, what teenage kid now knows how to like rewire a 1970s ambulance? Like,
yeah. I know.
that's
Yeah,
what was it, an ambulance or a hearse that they
it was an ambulance. Yeah,
right.
yeah. 59 Chevy. And
Yeah.
like they're
59
like,
what
yeah.
teenager in today's day and age knows how to like work on a 59 Chevy?
I
They
know.
didn't explain why he knew that. Like that would have been nice.
No.
Yeah.
Like apparently, like when they were casting it, they were casting for someone who was going to be like a gearhead, someone who and like I think that's what the character is meant to be, but because they do no character development for Trevor at all, like the closest you get to seeing that is that he wears a t-shirt that says, I think it says Chevrolet on it or something. He basically
Yeah.
wears a like a car branded t-shirt that like you're supposed to think, oh, this guy knows about cars or whatever. But like that character, out of all the characters, I think that the Phoebe character, the young girl who's Egon Spengler's granddaughter, goes through like interesting character development, because she goes there and she's like very autistic coded, isn't she? She's supposed to
Right.
be like she can't make friends and all that sort of thing. And she goes there and she kind of comes into herself while she's there. Like Trevor does nothing, like Trevor like is just like a flat character the whole way through. There's no, there's just
Well, he
nothing
likes the
interesting.
local girl. That's
Yeah,
they
yeah,
both spend more time on that, where he has love at first sight with the girl at the restaurant.
yeah,
Um, but and trying hard to impress her. But yeah, I mean, really, that's the kind of thing you could deal with one line of exposition, to
yeah,
just be like, oh, back when we lived in Kansas, you got to spend your time in that old mechanic's garage learning about vintage cars or something like that, like
yeah, yeah.
like that
Oh,
like, just to explain like how he knows how to his way around the undercarriage, because I mean I know nothing about cars.
I wouldn't know where to start, like I can't do even the simplest of things. I don't think I could even change a tire anymore, like it's been
Right.
so long. Yeah, and I don't know. I think that the whole thing about him coming and falling in love with the local girl, they make that the whole of his character, don't they? And
Mm,
like you can see because the Lost Boys has a setup very similar to Ghostbusters Afterlife, doesn't it? The mother moves the kids out to the middle of nowhere,
right.
to go to like their grandfather's house, and the elder one falls in love with the local girl, and it's all just done so much more smoothly, so much better, and without sort of making the whole character that kid is. It's Michael in Lost Boys, isn't it? They
Yeah.
say, yeah, they don't make that all he is, and yet,
Well, also his character from Stranger Things, because like he's like in love with Eleven
oh
through
yeah,
that whole.
yeah, yeah, I
So
thought of that.
yeah,
Yeah, talk about being pigeonholed as an actor.
right. He's got the
Yeah,
puppy love, like love sickness thing going on. Like
yeah, yeah.
it probably gets more embarrassing as he gets older, but
Yeah, well, while I was watching it, I was thinking like, what is this kid gonna do when he's older, as an actor? Because everything that he does, like the inflections in his voice, his body language, the characters that he plays are just like absolute teenage stereotypes at the moment, and
Mhm.
he's very much pigeonholed into that. Like you said, just in the latest run of Stranger Things, it and Ghostbusters Afterlife, it's not just sort of the paranormal, teenage movie. It's the paranormal teenage movie from the 80s. It's got it's
Yeah.
like he's super pigeonholed.
In
And I
fact,
was thinking,
in Stranger Things, when there's like a Halloween episode, he's dressed up as a Ghostbuster.
that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And you do worry. I mean, the rest of the cast, like Carrie Coon, I always think is great, whatever she's in. I think she's fantastic. Paul Rudd is bland, but he's charming, and he does that very well through Ghostbusters Afterlife.
yeah. He's so weirdly likable. It's like
Yeah, exactly.
if anybody wants to talk shit about Paul Rudd, like I mean, yeah, bland is maybe like the worst thing you could possibly say about him.
Yeah, yeah,
But he's magnetic in a way that you don't never really mind seeing him there. Like
exactly. Yeah. He actually makes things better, I think. Like that
yeah,
was the conclusion I came to watching that. Yeah, he wasn't like an inspired choice, but he made that film better.
he
And
did.
yeah, and I
And
thought that kid,
that's actually another trope that I really don't like is when it's like a school teacher that somehow is also like a scientist. Like
yeah.
that I mean, there's lots of school teachers out there that they get their education and they know enough to teach children, but they're not like doing seismology on the side and like there always seems to be one of these in these movies. And that was the
Yeah.
thing in Stranger Things. Like the science teacher in that was telling them about like how the upside down works with
Yeah.
yeah, and like advanced physics.
Yeah. Donnie Darko, the philosophy of time travel.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, again, like more sort of 80s set movies.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's kind of lazy trope, isn't it, to have that sort of, none of
Right.
my teachers did anything like that when I was at school.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
I don't know where they kind of get that idea from. But yeah,
I
I
think
mean,
because nobody's ever questioned it before. I think you and I questioning it now is going to be the death knell for.
yeah. Don't go trying that again.
We're not buying it, Hollywood. Stop it.
Who I thought was great in that movie was the kid with the really inspired name, Podcast.
Yeah.
Like because I don't think I've never seen him in anything before ever, that kid. And like I looked him up online and I don't think he even has a Wikipedia entry. Like I couldn't find anything else. I think that he'd worked with Jason Reitman on a lockdown project or something, but I thought every scene he was in, he kind of stole the scene, just by being kind
Well,
of cool and natural.
yeah, he's really good because where the young girl, Egon's granddaughter, is the stand-in
Yeah.
for Egon, like the new Egon, or the younger Egon. He's kind of like the new Ray,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
absolutely.
That becomes very obvious at the end. You like learn that Ray Stantz listens to his podcast and stuff.
Yeah, the one
But
listener.
yeah,
I
I
can
had a note
relate.
on here. Yeah, his hero is the only person listening to him. He somehow never figured that out. But yeah, I made a note about him. Kid called podcast eye roll emoji. I actually wrote out the words eye roll emoji.
Yeah,
'Cause
it's oh god, yeah, no,
I
it
feel like that
almost
I feel like that happened in one of the recent Godzilla movies. Was it the Kong versus Godzilla?
Yeah, it
One
was.
of the
Yeah.
characters had a podcast about like conspiracy theories or something, and then
Yeah.
he had some weird nickname that was related to having a podcast, and you're just like, people don't do that though. Like,
No,
what is
no.
this?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a way that like you can just imagine the studio execs saying like, you know what's popular these days? Podcasts. Like get it in there. Get that in your movie. And then like, yeah, because it is the fact is that the redeeming factor that is that he's a good character and a good actor, you know, like, but like I don't know how they could get that past like just like, yeah, he's called podcast because he has a podcast. You know, and that's
Well,
it.
didn't he name himself Podcast too?
Yeah.
He was like, they call me Podcast. Like, who calls you that? He's like, I call myself that, or something like that. You know?
Yeah. But I thought the cast was good enough that the the bits where the original cast come into it, I think are almost the weakest bits of that movie in a way. And I know that's the bit that everyone needs for the fan service and they need to see the original Ghostbusters suit up and be there. And I know that they couldn't have done the emotional like ending of Egon Spengler's story arc without that.
Mhm.
But I feel like if they'd have just set this in the same universe but kept it separate enough, you know, there could be, you know, the granddaughter of Egon Spengler, that's fine, you know, and gone through the movie without having the original Ghostbusters in it. I think it could have been a slightly stronger movie because I feel like, you know, they sort of almost just wheel them on at the end, don't they? They all turn up. It's
Yeah,
very Deus Ex Machina. They all turn up, you know, like and like
but they don't even really save the day. Like, I guess
no,
they just provide enough distraction to let that happen. But yeah, so, I mean, it's obvious why they're there, and like the fans wanted to see them, and
yeah,
like you get a bit of a touching reunion with them and the ghost of Egon Spengler. Like, fine. Of
yeah,
course, Harold Ramis was dead by the time this movie came out, which
yeah,
I
but
don't know that
yeah,
we mentioned that. So it's just a CG Ramis. Um,
who
but
doesn't speak.
yeah, and then you have the after scenes. Like each one of them gets their own little scene where they have, you know, well, like Ernie Hudson's character Winston Zedmore is like a successful entrepreneur, you
Yeah,
know, so you have like an interview with him at the end. You have an amusing little bit with Bill Murray and Sigourney Weaver, and you realize
yeah,
they're married, you know, like
yeah. And
so
the Ernie Hudson bit kind of sets up the next movie,
yeah,
um, which is um, which is really not very good. Like all if you imagine all the bits that were good about Ghostbusters Afterlife and take them out of Ghostbusters Afterlife, then you kind of get what the fourth movie is like.
uh,
Um, yeah,
yeah,
it's
sounds about right.
unfortunate. Yeah, it's is unfortunate, and they're trying to milk the franchise, which it isn't like a super cool franchise. You know, like I mean, I think it's cool, but look, you know, in the sort of scale of cool franchises, you know, that you could try and exploit for money, I just don't think that Ghostbusters is there. You know, is one that kids would be calling back for, not in the way that they are for Star Wars, where seemingly kids just can't get enough of Star Wars still,
Right.
or Jurassic World. You know, the dinosaurs. You know, like for some reason, Ghostbusters just doesn't have that sort of weight to it. Or if you contrast it like to the Marvel movies, you know, which are like
Mm,
every now and then just make a billion. You know, I mean,
yeah.
these Ghostbusters movies now they're not even making a quarter of a billion. You know, but they're
Yeah, I
still
mean, I think they relied heavily on the nostalgia, which was also kind of a frustration that it took so long for them to do it. You know,
yeah,
so they really had to deliver, and then the reboot was, you know, made some people happy, but not everybody. So like they still had a chance, but at this point now, it's like, yeah, we've seen it now, and I don't. Only the most diehard fans, I guess, are going to overlook what's kind of obvious mining for whatever revenue is possible off of it,
yeah,
you know?
yeah. I think there is this kind of genre of reboot which I think Afterlife is. And there's like a couple of other examples that I think really hit the same spot. You've got Star Wars: The Force Awakens,
Hmm.
Jurassic World, Blues Brothers 2000, where they're reboots, but they're in the same continuity as the originals. They're not like, you know, like The Evil Dead or The Crow or Halloween, where they change continuity. You know, these are these are actual in the same continuity, but they're retelling the same stories for a new generation. So you're
Yeah.
like Star Wars: The Force Awakens. Basically, they've got a new uh, Death Star again, don't they? And
Right.
or Star Killer Base or whatever it's called. And they basically find a weakness in it, and they go and exploit the weakness and blow it up. Some kid from Tatooine is like the chosen one or whatever, and it goes through that they're recycling it all to feed it to a new generation who they can hopefully hook in. And the same with Jurassic World. They just retell Jurassic Park but on a larger scale. And that's it. It's an amusement park. It's got dinosaurs in the the fences fail, dinosaurs get out, they have to try and stop the dinosaurs and escape from the park, and that's it. And
But
like
is it the same story though? I don't know. Like,
well, I mean, it's not as good. I would say that it's like, but like it's like they're basically just like repackaging these same ideas
right.
for like a young generation. And Ghostbusters Afterlife is like it starts off slightly different, and then by about midway through, you find out, oh, Gozer's coming. Then
Mhm.
Zool and Vince Clortho come and possess the teacher and the mother Callie, and
Yeah,
they
that's where it starts to feel like, oh, we're just running down the list of the things in the first one that we can make
exactly,
reference to, which
yeah,
is fine because you have to assume if we're doing the continuity here, you have to assume that Ivo Shandor's sorcery that plays into his construction of these places like this town and Spook Central,
yeah,
um, that it's going to have to go through that same process every time Azul is brought out. Like
yeah,
so.
yeah,
So I mean, of course, we're going to have to hit those notes again, right? But it makes sense to me. I don't hold it against the movie for that, but it did kind of feel like just hitting those touchstones to make sure
yeah,
the fans got to
exactly.
see that again, with different actors. Um,
Yeah. And then you have the
uh,
little marshmallow men,
oh,
have
I
no
made a
real
note
point.
about that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that drives me friggin' crazy. Like, I'll tell you right now, like, I
Yeah.
I don't know who to blame for this, but somebody needs to be held accountable. Like, why does every movie now? It seems to be specifically for marketing purposes, so they can make dumb commercials for other products with these
Yeah.
characters and populate it with a bunch of clone copies of the same thing. Like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Minions movies. When those Minions movies came out, Despicable
Yeah.
Me and the sequels, I got so sick of seeing those little yellow guys. I never saw a single one of those movies. I don't know what they're about, but I'm like, what, all these little yellow guys? I'm tired of seeing them. Beetlejuice, as you mentioned.
Oh God.
For some reason, you have a mob of the shrunken head guys,
Yeah.
and they were bringing those out for like advertisements for other things, and I'm like, we don't need a ton of clone copies of something every
No, I
movie. We
I
really don't
don't
need
like
that.
that I don't like that movie. Beetlejuice, I felt was one of the weakest of these nostalgia
Yeah,
reruns. And they did that thing again, like he wanted to marry Lydia and all the rest of it. They were wheeling out the old
yeah,
bits again, like hitting those old touchstones. And it's like there's a place for nostalgia. And sometimes Ghostbusters Afterlife gets it right. And sometimes it gets it really, really wrong. But I agree with you about the sort of armies of clone things. Like the Porg from was it the Last
oh,
Jedi?
yeah,
The
yep,
little things that are like little owls or whatever. And they're just something like, it's like you've got to hook kids in and you got to be able to sell lots of them. And like the little Marshmallow Man was such an obvious sort of, not only sort of like, oh, you like the Marshmallow Man, do you? Well, there's lots of them and they're little now and they're cute.
right,
But also the thing of like kids are gonna love this, and you think
right.
like, are they though?
Yeah,
Like
kids actually aren't that dumb though. That's the
no,
thing. It's like
yeah,
you can't pull one over on them. I mean, in learning a little bit of magic tricks, what I've read is that it's a lot harder to do magic tricks for children because they're not afraid to call you out on stuff.
yeah,
And like that's the thing is like little kids are not just going to see tons of little marshmallow men and be delighted immediately because you got
no,
lots of little things that all look the same, causing havoc in the grocery store. Like
yeah,
it's not an automatic one-to-one thing. Like you have to build their trust first, and um, it's a weird avenue that every movie seems to, or every franchise seems to want to pursue these days, and I'm so tired of it. I'd like to see it go
yeah.
away forever. Like
But it must have started like, or like maybe not started, but I mean, it must have got a real foothold after Return of the Jedi. Because having the Ewoks that were sort of basically like teddy
yeah,
bears, and there was lots of them.
well, In the 80s, you had a lot of this because you had the success of Gremlins. I think Gremlins
Critters.
was the big one, where yeah, and then Critters was kind of a knockoff of Gremlins.
Yeah.
And not really; it was its own thing. I
Yeah, I
love
quite like
Critters.
Critters, yeah.
I love
Yeah.
Critters. I watched those
Someone's,
movies so many times.
yeah, someone's got to do Critters 3 with you. That would be a really interesting one.
Well, I would like to, but I'll mention right here. I'll just throw in a plug for people that I don't even have any relationship with, other than I like the show. Is there's a podcast called This May Hurt a Bit, where they do entire franchises. They do
Ah,
every movie in the and they're currently doing Critters. So if
oh,
people want to
okay.
look that up, like yeah, go look that up because the Critters franchise is great. But yeah, I mean, you see a lot of different examples of this where lots of little things.
Yeah.
And sometimes it works, but if it's really just an element of a movie and it's there just to grab people's attention or just amuse the kids in the audience, like I really don't think anybody buys it, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. But I mean, Gremlins was the same year as Ghostbusters, the original Ghostbusters, wasn't it? 1984. And you had, I think Beverly Hills Cop came at the end of that year. And I think you also had, I think Splash came out that year as well. I mean, like 1984, they really seemed to be doing well with brand new IP, which is something that's lacking so much,
mhm,
here in like 2024. And that's when you start getting stuff like Beetlejuice, or Ghostbusters Afterlife, or Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, which was released this year, and Twisters and all the rest. I mean, these films can be done right, because there was the Blade Runner sequel.
yeah,
Like, did you enjoy that one? Because I thought that was pretty good. And the same with Mad Max Fury Road. Like I thought that was a pretty good movie. Like they had the right amount of nostalgia for the original whilst creating something a little bit different. But it seems to be like lacking in a lot of these movies now when they reboot or do they don't really know who they're aiming at, because like you say, the kids are too smart for
right,
the adults there, they get like a hit of nostalgia, but that's not enough to make it a blockbuster.
yeah,
I mean, I think that we're talking about original IP, and like the way that it's kind of lacking a lot now because everything
mhm,
seems to be Marvel or reboots of old IP. It's easy to ignore how original the first Ghostbusters movie was,
mhm,
because I mean, so many of those concepts were stuff that we kind of take for granted now, but because it came out when we were kids, I guess. But
right,
just were new ideas, like fighting ghosts with nuclear weapons. That's like, I mean, that's a cool idea. It's quite new for Ghostbusters. Like no one really thought of that before. And stuff like ectoplasm being slime. I mean, I know that there are historical accounts of ectoplasm being slimy, but originally it was like gauze or like fabric. And then
right,
after Ghostbusters, the slime is so much of a character in the first movie, obviously with Slimer, that it becomes the baddie in the second movie.
right.
Ghosts being weird monsters and not just like the souls of the dead. Obviously, that's like an older idea, but the way that they're portrayed in Ghostbusters formed so much of what I think of as Ghostbusters now. But those ghosts, they're not really like ghosts. They're more like kind of Lovecraftian creatures, particularly in the first Ghostbusters movie, where you're looking at another dimension next to ours with these weird monsters kind of coming out of them.
Right.
All that sort of thing. The whole idea of ghost busting being a blue collar job, is fantastic, because before that it was priests. I mean, when you look back to The Exorcist or
Yeah.
something, you just had like a bunch of priests coming to get rid of your ghosts, and if you were going to trap them or contain them, it was using magic or religion. You were going to trap them in something. You weren't going to sort of incarcerate them in the way that Ghostbusters like do now. And like all these ideas were like fairly original, and that's part of why I think that movie was such a success. And no matter how many times you redo Ghostbusters, you're not going to reach that impact again of, because by the time you Ghostbusters Afterlife, Ghost busting ghosts is old, like it's so old.
Right. Yeah.
The kids don't seem to remember that half of New York was wiped out by 100-foot Marshmallow Man, which is one of the
Right.
things, the massive gripes I had with the movie, is that like if there'd been a terrorist attack which blew up half of the buildings on Central Park, people would remember that date, without a doubt. But for some
Right.
reason, these kids don't have any idea that ghosts destroyed half of New York in 1984. I found that probably the most unbelievable part of the whole plot, is that no one knew who the Ghostbusters were. No one.
Well, I was confused about that because it seemed like, as far as the media and history was concerned, that was like a ghost hysteria. They call what did they call
Yeah.
it? They call it like the Great Ghost Hysteria of 1984 or something like
Yeah.
that. And there is reference to that in the second one, which I guess has been criticized, where the city kind of held the Ghostbusters responsible for all the
Yeah. Yeah.
damage,
Yeah.
and they were outcasts, and Peter has to go host like a paranormal TV
World
show,
of the Psychic.
right?
Yeah.
And I'm not gonna lie, when I watched, yeah,
Points. Yeah.
uh,
That's it.
when I watched that Ghostbusters 2 as a kid, and Peter's hosting that show, I'm like, man, it would be so cool if there were shows like that. It would be so cool if someday I got to host a show like that. And like,
Yeah.
well, here I am. Maybe I'll get my own World of the Psychic TV show.
Yeah.
The other
That's
thing
we.
was having my own occult bookstore, because Ray had an occult
Yes.
bookstore.
Raise occult books, and that's one thing that I was really glad they brought back
Yeah.
for Ghostbusters 3, because that was one of my favorite things, because like I came so close to one, you know, to that sort of. At one time there was a like an empty shop in Preston, and I found out that actually like my granddad had the lease to it, and I was thinking, can I turn that shop into an occult bookshop? This was like when I was
Yeah.
18 or something, and the answer was I couldn't. But like I just loved the idea of Raise a Cult, because there's not many books like that anymore. There's a few down in London, and one or two kind of Yorkshire way. But even in a big city like where I live, like Manchester, there's nothing really like a good occult bookshop.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, they're in short supply here as well. Um, Depends on where you go, though. But I mean, a lot of them they end up being kind of just new agey shops
Yeah,
anyway.
the
You know,
crystal shops,
so
basically, with a few books.
right, yeah, and
Yeah.
you can get tarot cards or you can get incense or something. But yeah, show me to the dusty tomes. That's where I want to go.
Exactly. And the whole thing about, you know, because they did that in Ghostbusters 2, when basically about halfway through the movie, the Ghostbusters get institutionalized for saying that there's ghosts in New York.
Right.
This is only 5 years after the original events of the film, of the first film. But I still think that like the way that they act as if like kids have basically forgotten what Ghostbusters were. I don't
Mhm.
know if that's believable in the world of that movie.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think of like a real life corollary that would make sense, but given
It's
how
difficult.
dramatic it is in that movie, it's especially with all the destruction and stuff. Like
Yeah.
the Stay
And the
Puft Marshmallow
Marshmallow
Man
Man.
crushes a church. Yeah,
Yeah.
everybody saw the Marshmallow Man. Like,
Yeah. There must have been news crews there filming it. You know.
well, there's huge throngs of crowds of people outside.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
uh,
And there's videos of it on YouTube, and yet the kids, one of whom runs a paranormal podcast, doesn't know anything about it. And then and so Paul Rudd's character, like Gruberson, I think he's called, just says, "Well, come here." Calls it up on YouTube straight away and shows them a video of the Ghostbusters, like basically arriving there at the Shandor building. And you think like, well, yeah, surely it's not that. Yeah, people must believe in ghosts in that universe.
yeah, or at least like a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, or there
So
being some.
hold on a second here. I think
Oh, hold on, you've gone now. I can't hear you.
Please. So let's make some.
Okay, listeners, some ghosts are interfering with our conversation here. Apparently, they don't like what we're saying. So,
It was the mention of gremlins, wasn't it? It sort of puts them into the system straight away.
oh man, yeah, I got to banish the gremlins now. That's got to do my banishing. Yeah, I'm thrown off now. I forget where we were, but
I was kind of wondering then if so. I think that I quite so the first time I watched this movie, I was quite moved by it, and I've seen it 3 times now. The second time I watched it, I really wasn't impressed. Like it didn't live up to that feeling of watching it in the cinema. You know, it just didn't do that for me. And then the third time I watched it with the lower expectations, I kind of enjoyed it again. But I don't think you enjoyed that movie, did you?
well, yeah. I mean, I think that I could see the sentiment coming from a mile away, and it made me really not fall for it. It might have been different had I been in a theater.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not really sure because I don't know when that's going to happen to me, and I feel like when I have a genuine affection for a franchise or intellectual property, I can get sucker punched by it pretty easily. I'm thinking of like I went to see one of the Star Trek movies in the theater, and
Yeah,
it didn't occur to me until I went to see it that I had never actually seen one in the theater before. I had seen all the movies. I'm a big Trekkie, like I grew
yeah,
up with it. Never in the theater. And the first time I saw the Enterprise on the screen, like I started tearing up. I'm like, oh,
yeah,
it's the
yeah,
Enterprise on the big screen. Like,
yeah,
uh,
yeah. I
so
quite like those. Are those the J.J. Abram ones?
I don't remember which one it was that I saw. It might have been like they might have done like a re-release of one of the older ones or something like that. And
Ah,
I saw
okay,
it
yeah,
at the
yeah,
local cinema, but I don't remember which one it was. But the point is that just seeing the Enterprise by itself was enough with the music and everything
yeah,
to hit
yeah,
me. But if I feel like if it's predictable and I feel like they're trying to manipulate those emotional valves, I'm like naturally resistant to it. I'm just like
yeah.
trying to close myself up. No, you're not going to make me do it. You're not going to make me cry. Like,
So do you think you would have been happier if they hadn't have done the new Ghostbusters movies, like the the,
no,
the
I mean,
Afterlife?
I went in with low expectations, and I went in
Yeah,
bristling a little bit at the fan service and what I felt like was going to really try for sentiment, which it did. Expecting all of that, I thought it was an entertaining movie. I thought it was
yeah,
entertaining and fun. And the part you mentioned with Ecto One driving around chasing the Muncher ghost, which is
yeah,
there in place of Slimer, we have a metal eating Muncher ghost.
yeah.
Uh,
Looks
uh,
like a tardigrade, doesn't it? One of those water bear things.
it does.
Yeah,
I didn't put that together before, but you're right. It absolutely does. And they that part to me felt like 80s high action adventure
yeah,
stuff, like Indiana Jones or something like that. It felt
yeah,
practical. It felt like there were practical effects going on, and
yeah,
that it had that like there was real stakes, like the danger was real of
yeah,
popping out the
yeah.
side of the car on like an ejector seat, like a suicide seat that pops out. Like,
Yeah, the gunner suit was fantastic. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, and that is when I think I mean, like, I think that having it centered around the kids was a bit of a ploy for, like, to get kids into it again, wasn't it? Like, I think that maybe um because so much of, like, cinema now is, like, based on that, like, striving for youth, isn't it? And that film was
Well,
basically
maybe.
like, yeah, I mean,
Maybe, but it was just a good plot device because the
yeah,
children were the only ones that were going to take a chance on this stuff, and
yeah, well, that's
they
true.
fall into it rather naturally, especially for the lead girl, who you mentioned is kind of neurotypical coded,
Yeah,
not even coded, it's overtly,
yeah,
said,
referred to. Yeah,
and then you make a the correlation between that and Spangler. You're just like, well, Spangler was for that time just kind of like a caricature of a scientist,
yeah.
talking about like, I had half a Slinky as a toy as a kid, and I straightened it, like,
Yeah. Yeah. And then when you try and work out, like, the timelines of it, I think that the mother from the Ghostbusters Afterlife must have been born before Ghostbusters 1. So all that time, Spengler had a kid as well, and
oh
and
wow, I
and
didn't
and
even think
that's
of that.
yeah, and that starts to, like, you start to think, like, one thing. I mean, it's kind of awful, like that because the reason that he gives for, like, abandoning his family is, like, that the world was going to end or whatever. But in
Right, that is
1984, he
true.
didn't know that, because they only sort of figure that out when they find out who Gozer is. But then on the other hand, like, you kind of see, like you're saying, when you look back at Spengler now, you can see that you're like, oh well, he was probably, like, neurodivergent as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's kind of an interesting spin on it without being heavy-handed about it or like trying
Yeah,
to make a statement. It just kind of presents it like this is what it is. And what I
yeah,
really like is that there's this connection. Okay, I'll just talk about the things I liked because I really don't
yeah,
like
yeah,
talking down about things. Um, I loved how it was portrayed that Egon was communicating with his granddaughter, moving the chess pieces on the chessboard.
yeah,
I thought that was a really, like, elegant way to, like, break the ice from the other side of the veil, and, really cool, like, that's something you could see happening, and in
yeah,
Ghostbusters, when it was at its best, I mean, they went to these, like, fantasy realms with with the design of the ghosts and what happens with them and how it all works. But they also contained things that you could see happening in real life, like the
Yeah.
stacking of the books. Like no human being would stack books that way. But
Yeah.
or just like the scene in the hotel, like there's a roll of toilet paper that floats across the hallway.
Yeah, I love that bit. Yeah.
Yeah,
What the
and I
hell do
mean,
you think you're doing?
having experienced like poltergeist activity in real life, it's like that. It feels genuine to me. A lot
Mm,
of that feels genuine, and I like that, and I like that his emotional bond. Perhaps might have been because of that neurodivergence. They had an easy connection.
yeah.
He knew that she would get it, and she's,
Yeah.
she's like a crazy genius too. Like she's uh, on his level with that. So yeah, the paranormal effects of Egon, like the CGI Egon was a little much for me.
Yeah.
How much of the movie hung on his character and as a tribute to him almost felt like a that at the very last screen that shows up before they show you the end scenes. It's like in loving memory of Harold Ramis, and I was like, really? Is it? I didn't catch that at any point in this.
Yeah, I think it might have been too subtle. They had to write it on the screen. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there was a lot to like about the movie. I don't want to see any more. That's the problem. Like
Right. Yeah,
I
we got it. We got it.
yeah, exactly. I
That
went
was
to
nice.
watch
Thank you. But
yeah, I went to watch the fourth one, and like I got to admit that I was suckered in by the whole idea, that I was getting to spend time in that world again. But that was not a good movie. Frozen Empire, the fourth one was not a good movie. And like I know they're making a sequel, and I know that so far the director said that it's going to revolve around the Little Marshmallow Men. So,
oh no.
yeah, so I mean I'm kind of out already. I don't know what to do with Ghostbusters. I mean, I wonder if it should be like Back to the Future and no one should touch it. I think those Ghostbusters films were enough because now they're talking they're going to do a new cartoon series, Ecto
Yeah.
Force or something, and then there was this whole idea of a gritty reboot to kind of be like in a different part of the universe, and that was going to be influenced by Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins and stuff, which sounds
Okay.
exactly what Ghostbusters doesn't need is to be taken seriously. And I kind of just want them to leave it alone, if I'm honest.
Yeah. I mean, there's also the option of just making original ideas. Original.
You
Just
can make
coming up with
films about ghosts. It doesn't have to be Ghostbusters.
right, and it can even be funny.
Yeah.
There's an I think it's either an English movie or a Scot or made in Scotland. I'm not sure, but I watched it years ago and I cannot find it now. It's very frustrating. I have no idea what the title is.
Mm,
Maybe somebody can help me. But it's about this woman who's the daughter of a paranormal investigator who had died, and she's like a medium, and it's a ghost. It's a ghost adventure story, and it's a comedy, and it's
okay.
fantastic, and it's a very
Yeah.
original tale. And I'm like, yeah, see, like it can be done. You can do it.
Yeah.
It's not that
Yeah.
old. It came out like a couple of years ago.
Okay.
I wish
I
I
don't-
wish I could remember what it was because I want to rent
yeah,
it.
I have no idea, but it sounds like something that I'd like,
Yeah,
because
and
I mean,
like one of the things with this that they brought, okay, Ivo Shandor's back, the architect sorcerer, which I wonder if there's a corollary between him and Frank Lloyd Wright, because there are these
okay.
people that talk about Frank Lloyd Wright having all these mystical leanings. But
All right.
that aside, I was kind of looking, I accepted that they're bringing back the big bad from the first one, and but this time around, I thought we were going to deal with Shandor directly,
Yeah.
and he doesn't last long,
No, no. And he's played by J.K. Simmons as well, who I thought
which
when
is
he came on, I thought, oh, this is going to be amazing.
yeah, you bothered to get J.K. Simmons for a single scene. He has one line.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I enjoyed it, but I feel like they should knock it all on the head there. Like you say, make some original movies. Like
Right.
get something that isn't these franchises, like, and I know that would kind of in a way destroy your Thirds of Charm
Yeah.
podcast if people were making all these sequels, but at the same time, like I really feel like it's gone too far now, like especially like when because like originally I was super super into all the Marvel movies as well, and now I kind of go and see them out of like a sense of duty almost,
Yeah.
most of them.
But sometimes you have to see one of those movies to make one of the other ones that you really want to see make sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. And the same with some of these like Star Wars TV series. It's like just get like I watched Severance on, have you seen that?
No.
There's like a TV show, an American TV show. And it's got like a weird sort of like Balladian like feel to it, that these people basically they separate their work lives from their home life, so that the home person can't remember the work life and the work life, so they can kind of work in secrecy. But it also means that they're almost like two separate people. And it was great. It was original. It was exciting. It was funny. It was well made. And you think like there's so many great ideas, so many great filmmakers who are wanting to get these ideas out. And as much as I enjoyed Ghostbusters Afterlife, think like, well, surely these people could be doing something something original, something different, something better.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like, I feel like there's so many reboots or sequels to older properties. Well, specifically sequels to older properties. It's kind of like we had an X Files return, we had a Twin Peaks
Yeah.
return, um, Beetlejuice, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
And
Awful.
there's so much of it that it's just kind of like, well, I guess, or even the newer Indiana Jones movies.
Oh
It's like
God, yeah.
you almost feel like, um, all right, if I'm going in with low expectations that much of the time, like, I mean, what are we doing here? Can we just come up with some good movies?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, I think
And
it must still be possible, but I foresee a lot of that. Probably, it's going to come to a head. I think that the the movie industry is struggling to catch up with the media world we have now, and people bemoan like the death of movie theaters and community around it, and streaming services are killing things, and like killing the properties. But I mean, we're opening up a lot of new avenues, and I think there's exciting stuff eventually on the horizon. But the
yeah,
old guard still has their claws dug in on this, and they really want to control um, any kind of creative motion from
yeah.
yeah.
And going to the cinema, like it's a great experience, and I still enjoy doing it. I love going to the cinema. I like going on my own. But like if you like existing IPs, you can find these independent cinemas all over the place that will play old movies, and you can pay like just a few quid to get in. And
Right.
like there's one down on the other side of Manchester, and I just go into town. Like I get something to eat, I go and watch a movie, like, and it can be anything, like this week they're showing The Craft or something like that. Like
Yeah.
a couple of weeks ago, I went to watch Itsuo the Iron Man, and like just like great movies, and I don't need someone to make a sequel of that to be able to go and see it at the cinema. I've seen Ghostbusters, the original, at the cinema a few times. I've enjoyed it every single time, and I probably would have enjoyed watching the original Ghostbusters more than I did Ghostbusters Afterlife, and that's probably a sign that you've got to stop. you
Right.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just give people the originals back.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah.
Um, yeah. I don't know. I feel like I didn't hate this movie, and I even enjoyed it. I had fun
Hmm.
watching it, and I expected to, but I expected, like I said, the fan service and the kind of jam it down your throat sentiment of it, the over the top sentiment. I think where they're really, really trying to make it a memorial to Ramus in a lot
Yeah,
of ways. It was just kind of like, um, I was already prepared for it going in, so it didn't anger me when I got to it. The only thing that angered
yeah,
me was the mini Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. Like that's all.
yeah.
That
You
was the
know,
only part that made me angry.
one thing that I thought of, one thing that I thought about when I was listening to your last episode that you did, that so a couple of episodes ago, I don't know where it is from when this one will be released, but you were talking about Halloween 3.
Halloween 3. Yeah.
Yeah, and you were saying that originally they were going to make an anthology of movies just
Right.
every Halloween. That is the one thing that I would be interested in with Ghostbusters, is to see other parts of the world in which ghosts like Slimer and Muncher and the Marshmallow Man and Gozer exist. Like you could do one in London, you could do one in South America somewhere,
Yeah.
you could do
Oh,
them,
yeah.
and that would be interesting. And that's kind of what I meant about the shoehorning in the old Ghostbusters kind of made the film worse in a way. If they'd have made this just like Ghostbusters, but in Oklahoma, but keep it in the same universe, so like people might know that proton streams can
Mhm.
hold ghosts and stuff,
Or
but
maybe there's other things you can do with ghosts that
exactly,
are,
yeah.
like
And
you just explore that. Yeah.
yeah, you could bring magic into it. You could
Right.
use magic alongside science. You could do some really interesting stuff by making it more of an anthology. So the next movie could be set somewhere completely different. They tells a complete story, then they could go to somewhere else. They could do that as a TV series as well. That would be really cool. That would be where I'm sick of having watched like another Ghostbusters movie where they wheel out Aykroyd, Hudson, and Bill Murray again.
Mhm.
I'm sick of it now. It's like I had that moment, like that little bit of nostalgia when they first like walked on at the end of Afterlife. I don't need to keep seeing that over and over and over. Just do it something different, do somewhere completely different, but use the same lore to support it. I would be completely behind that.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. That would be really cool. I feel like the Men in Black franchise kind of tried to do that, where they did
Yeah,
like MIB International and they didn't have any of the original
that's
characters.
a good point. Yeah,
And
I
I
didn't
think
watch
that
that one.
movie failed. I never saw it, but I
No.
don't think it was very popular.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
not a bad idea. Like you say, if you did it as a streaming TV series, like a Netflix series or like
Yeah.
whatever, yeah, you could have like an hour long show with the UK Ghostbusters or
Yeah.
Ghostbusters in Argentina or something like it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or like, I mean, there could be some really cool ones, like you could do one on like the International Space Station, like there's a ghost in space for
Oh,
some
Ghost
reason.
in Space?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Bring it on, all this great ideas, but like you don't need to tie it to Harold Ramis and Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd and Ernie Hudson anymore.
yeah, I agree with you. But that actually reminds me of a question I had about this movie. Did ghosts go away for the whole time? I don't really get it. Like ghosts made a comeback because something. Like I don't. It almost seems like ghosts stopped existing after the events of Ghostbusters 2.
Yeah,
And
so
they
it,
started
it kind
coming
of
back
like
when
it
yeah.
trips itself up a bit because there's those dates written on the wall, isn't there? There's the Krakatoa,
Yeah.
Hiroshima, and then 1984, the New York cross-dimensional rift, and then there's 2021, which is the year that the movie's set in, and supposedly the ghosts had gone away in between because like Gozer brought the ghosts from the other dimension or something, but that doesn't explain Vigo the Carpathian from
Right.
Ghostbusters 2. Yeah, so what's going on there? And then later on they say that the factory where they find Muncher, they say that the factory was haunted or something, oh no, the movie theater is haunted, isn't it? They say, oh, that
Yeah.
theater is haunted. So there must be ghosts around. But yeah, that's another
Not
bit
as
that made me
many, I
think
guess.
like, what?
Just not as many, or they're not as powerful. Maybe like
Yeah,
when Gozer comes through, it's they're given more
yeah.
material form. But
But
I
with an
think Vigo
anthology,
the Carpathian was actually a vampire, if you think
that's
about
an
it. Like
interesting
he's
point.
kind of
Yeah.
got this Dracula sort of thing going on, and traditionally in vampire lore, there's always like a thing about paintings. Like
Oh,
they can
okay.
inhabit a painting. There's like a famous account that was supposed to be a real life account of a vampire that was written by Franz Hartmann, who was a well-known occultist and hung out with like the Theosophists and the Golden Dawn and stuff. And he wrote
Yeah.
about a real account of a haunted painting, basically, but it was occupied by a lady baroness that was a vampire. And
That's so cool.
yeah, so I think Vigo is more of in line with vampire lore than
Yeah. We
traditional
see,
ghost lore.
if they did an anthology series, they could go back in time to do, like the same ghost busting lore, but back in sort of the 19th century or the 18th century, that they could
Oh, that
actually
would
go
be cool.
to the Krakatoa when that was, if that was supposed to be a cross rift as well. They could look into stuff like old, the Golden Dawn and all that sort of stuff. It would be like so much better than them just keep pushing on with these same characters.
Right. Well, maybe Nikola Tesla was a Ghostbuster. Maybe
Yeah,
that's what he was trying to
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. coming up with all the equipment and stuff. Yeah, I mean, all that stuff is
But
like,
was it Krakatoa that was on the timeline? I thought it was.
yeah.
They made reference to the Tunguska event too, I
And
think.
Tunguska was 1908, wasn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, Krakatoa was the first one, then Tunguska, and then 1945 for the um, Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
yeah.
And then I think it went to 84. Yeah, so they were doing it like every few years, but yeah, it didn't make sense that the ghost would just disappear in between.
Strange,
Yeah.
strange. But overall, not the worst movie. I mean, I think if you're
No.
a super fan of Ghostbusters, you'll enjoy it more. If you're if you're I don't know, like me, I really feel like the 1980s New York trio of Ramis and Murray and Aykroyd, and then adding in Ernie Hudson as well, plus everybody else like Annie Potts and Rick Moranis and everything.
Mm,
Like that had a very certain feel to it, a very
yeah.
certain, yeah, it's stuck in time. And I think Afterlife did enough to distance itself from that, it didn't make you miss it too much. And it gave
Mm,
you an extended world, and you get to see Midwest, and it gave you new characters that are still related to the old ones. It was a tenuous grip on the timeline that I
yeah.
think was wise. It was a wise choice on the part of all the filmmakers. But with a few sticking points and a few hiccups, I think it's an okay third movie.
Yeah, yeah, it's okay. I mean, like you said, I think that original cast, I think that was like alchemy, a cinematic alchemy. I think it was like a one off really. And as good as like or as much as I enjoyed Afterlife, it was just borrowing that. Like it did its own thing, but in the end, I wouldn't have been into that movie had it not been a Ghostbusters movie.
Right, right. Yeah, I think Paul Rudd had just enough charm to glue that all together,
Yeah,
and make it gel. But yeah, other than that, and like you said, the kid that played podcast was pretty great, and the
I thought
girl
it
was
was great.
great. Finn Wolfhard could have been given better things to do. It's not his fault, but like it would have been better if he had better motivations in the movie that we
Yeah.
haven't seen him do before. But yeah, um, yeah. Overall, so as far as the whole franchise goes, um, I imagine. Would you agree with me that one and two are about equally good, or would you say the
Yeah,
first
yeah,
one's just
absolutely. Yeah.
about?
I mean, I would
Yeah,
say the Ghostbusters one just about is probably my favorite. But I would say that they're on equal standing for me. Yeah, I'm not a hater at all of Ghostbusters 2.
right, right. Yeah, so um, yeah, I like to try to get an idea of where the third one stands in the whole franchise, but it
Oh
seems
yeah.
like it's right on the back of Ghostbusters one and two, and then everything else is kind of.
Yeah, yeah. So Ghostbusters 1 and 2, I think are like, yeah, I mean, Ghostbusters is my favorite movie of all time. So that's right up there. Um, Ghostbusters 2 is kind of up there. Ghostbusters 3, like Ghostbusters Afterlife is way down, but it's still better than the reboot or the third sequel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I feel like I'm gonna have to watch Frozen Empire now. Yeah, I'm almost more tantalized when somebody says it's a bad movie. I'm like, ooh, how bad is it? I want to see it now.
Yeah. You'll find out.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm so glad that you actually suggested this movie. I had told you about this concept before I even really got the show going, and this was the one that you were eager to do. So I like when guests bring a movie to me. It's kind of cool. But I thank you for coming on to talk about this. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Um,
thank you so much for having me. I've had a really, really good time, and I love this podcast. So, yeah, I'm excited about being here, and I'm excited about hearing what you've got coming. I've not listened to. You've dropped an episode today, which I've not listened to, so I'm like, I know what I'm doing tonight now. But
right.
yeah, no, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. And people can find your podcast, Vayse. It's spelled
Yeah,
Payse, not.
that's right. Yeah, you can get us www.base.co.uk, and we're on social media, so you can get us on Instagram and Twitter at Base, and then Baseball backwards. That's at VAYSEESYAV. And I've just recently gone on to Blue Sky as well because Twitter's such a fucking cesspit. And so I can't really remember. I know we've got a very similar handle over there, but they're slightly longer. But you'll find us if there's only one base. So
Yeah, the search bar on Blue Sky is very good. It's much better than it was on Twitter. Like
yeah.
if you type in VAYSE, the Peter's podcast will pop up. And I would highly recommend listening to past episodes. You and Steven have a lot of great authors and magicians and
And you're in
Peter's
there as well. Yeah, we did an episode with you at the beginning of the year, which was a really good one.
oh yeah, Elvis with a flaming sword.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Stephanie Quick, another good friend
Steph
of mine.
Quick. Yeah, and their episode, I absolutely love doing that as well. Talking, I mean, that's the great thing about this, isn't it? You know, just getting to talk to all these interesting people.
Oh yeah, I mean that's most of the reason I'm doing a show right now is like I want an excuse to have little conversations with people about things. So people that I like. So it's all very selfish. You're welcome, listeners. But I will say, as far as Vayse goes, to the listeners, definitely check out their Halloween special because it's almost like a movie for your ears. It's like a little radio play kind of podcast. Cosmic horror thing that was written by Peter, and I think you, sir, have some chops when it comes to that kind of writing, and I'd like to see you do more fiction writing. Is that something you do, or is it just tinkering with?
Yeah. I mean, I like doing it. I don't get enough time for it, and I hate the process of doing it. So like, I really enjoy it once I'm doing it, but the process itself I find kind of painful. I don't know if you find that when you're writing.
Absolutely. I think all writers do.
Yeah. So I'm trying, but yeah, the idea is that me and Buckley are going to start doing like radio plays every now and then, and like shorter than because that one nearly broke me. The Halloween episode ended up being 2.5 hours, which wasn't really what we meant. We meant 45 minutes. And then then like loads of people I didn't know if people would be interested. So when I asked you, I hadn't even written a part for you, but I thought like, oh, it'd be great to have AP come on. And so then I was immediately right. I spent another day like writing a part, because like I was just so excited to have all my friends sort of come and do this with us. But yeah, we're going to try maybe some like half-hour like fiction episodes, but we're not going to do like, because for people who listen to your podcast who don't know, we kind of for about a week maybe passed it off as a real episode. We're not going to do that again. So I'd recommend that if people want to listen to the Halloween one, listen to a good few of the normal podcast to get some context.
Yeah, you have to be a little bit familiar with the show for
yeah. But yeah, we're going to try some actual sort of fiction, some sci-fi and that sort of thing, and just see what we can do, hopefully.
Well, I think you have a natural knack for it. So I'm looking forward to hearing more of that.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
So thank you for coming on the show. And I was going to come up with a good sign off here, and I didn't do it. I don't know. Who are you going to call? Who are you going to call, Peter?
I'll call you.
All right, just call me. We'll call each other. All right. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you. Take care.